How does the war in Ukraine affect immigration to Israel? You may think that Israel and Ukraine are far from each other, but now as part of the global world, we're seeing the effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine even here in Israel. We're all watching really in shock and horror at this war in Europe, and we see many Ukrainians that are fleeing or trying to flee the Ukraine. Most of them obviously are going to Poland, Romania, Moldova, Hungary, the neighboring countries. But since the beginning of this war, we've also seen an influx of Ukrainians that are trying to come to Israel. And we have seen that the Israeli immigration authorities, at the beginning, they didn't exactly know what to do. But as of the 1st of March, 2022, the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, has actually made a policy for immigration of Ukrainians and also Israelis in Ukraine and their families, and also Ukrainians that want to make Aliyah, according to the law of return because they're Jewish, to Israel. So what does this very new policy say? So there's a few groups of people. First of all, those who are eligible for Aliyah, what we call Olim. They're Jewish or children or grandchildren of Jews. And we see that many of them are contacting the Jewish agency in Lvov in Ukraine. And we are hearing about 10,000 people that are wanting to make Aliyah. Israel is trying to make it easier for them, to make it quicker. And this has to do with the Ministry of Immigration and Absorption. So I can give you a few examples that you will no longer have to submit the criminal background check, for example. Also, the documents don't need to get the authentication by the apostille. So this is just to show that Israel is trying to make it easier for Aliyah to Israel. Also, people that are in Ukraine at the moment, if they're men at the right ages, they're drafted to the military, so they can't come to Israel, but still their wife and children will be able to come without them. So this is first of all. The second group of people are Israelis that are living in the Ukraine together with their family. So they will be able to come to Israel quicker without prior checking of their relationships. Even children from a previous marriage will be able to enter Israel as tourists. And all this doesn't usually happen in regular days, but Israel is trying to make it easier for Ukrainians that are connected to Israel to come to Israel. The other thing is that you have Israelis that have invited their partner or spouse from the Ukraine to come to Israel. Their partners will be able to come even before the interview, for example, at the Israeli consulate in Kiev. Obviously, all this is not happening. So partners or spouses of Israelis can come to Israel as tourists. The other group are first-degree relatives. So we're talking about Ukrainians that are in the Ukraine in danger, but they have first-degree relatives in Israel. So they will be able to come here to Israel to be with their family members. They do need to sign an obligation that they will leave Israel at the end of the war and when their visa expires. The last group are tourists that just come to Israel and are invited by someone but not a relative. In these cases, the Israeli that's inviting needs to give a bank guarantee of 10,000 shekels for each person to make sure that they leave on time. So these are who can enter Israel. Unfortunately, in my opinion, even though Israel is a signatory for the International Convention for Refugees, at the moment, if a Ukrainian just gets on a flight, say in Warsaw in Poland, and lands at the Ben Gurion airport, and they don't have any friends or relatives in Israel, they will most likely be denied entry to Israel. So this is very important to note. At the moment, Israel doesn't allow freely Ukrainians to enter Israel. just because they're Ukrainians, because they don't, Israel Immigration Authority doesn't want to allow any Ukrainian to come here if they're not sure that they will leave when the war ends. The last important update is that Ukrainians that are already in Israel, their visa is extended automatically for 2 months. So if you are Ukrainian in Israel and you have a student visa or a work visa or even a tourist visa, it's automatically extended for another 2 months. Even Ukrainians that are in Israel illegally without any visa will not be deported. Obviously, Israel is not going to deport someone to a war zone where their life is in danger. So this is the update as of the 1st of March 2022. Even in the policy it says that things can change because the situation is very dynamic. We all are hoping that the negotiations for a peace and a ceasefire will succeed. In the meantime, this is the policy of the Israeli immigration authorities. As always, if you have any questions, please contact us.